Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk Shop. My name is Ted Dirkx. This is Ryan Hugen. And this morning, we're excited to talk to you about how to get more out of your trommel screen. But first, let's start with some introductions. Ryan, do you want to get us started?
You bet. Good morning, everybody. Like Ted mentioned, my name is Ryan Hugen. I have been with Vermeer Corporation for 26 years. I started my career here on the production floor, and that led me into a parts specialist role. And from this role, I did transition into a technical service support specialist role. And that is what led me into my current position today, which is an application specialist for the Recycling and Forestry Group. One of the many things I do on a day-to-day basis is work directly with our dealers and customers. And this is to ensure that we are getting our customers into the proper equipment to make them successful at the end of the day. Ted?
Very good. Thank you. And like I mentioned, my name is Ted Dirkx. I'm the sales manager here for the Recycling and Forestry Group. And I've been here about 10 years, and I've been with the sales team the entire 10 years. And most of what I have done over those years is really spending a lot of time traveling out to our dealerships, helping our customers demonstrate equipment, deliver new equipment, and then following up to help them work through any application challenges they may be having. So over that time, I've seen a lot of different situations, from extremely wet to extremely dry, lots of different types of screening technologies. And this morning, I'm excited for us to share some of that experience. But before we get started, we are live on Facebook, so feel free to chat any kind of questions you may have in the comments throughout the broadcast, and we will do our best to stop and answer any of those questions as we see them come in. And so let's first get started with what I think is probably the biggest challenge most of our customers struggle with, and that is screening high moisture materials. These can come in the form of compost or even topsoil during wet times of year, and we oftentimes have conversations helping our customers overcome these challenges. What type of situation or what kind of discussion would you have to start things off with helping a customer through some of these challenges?
Well, first off, I would start with the simplest things. What we're going to look at is they were probably running their machine around a 5-degree slope, which is a typical. So that's where we'll start. What we'll do is go ahead and back that off, drop that down to 4, maybe even 3, and we'll just watch that material and just give it more time to dwell on the drum.
Yeah. Yep. Sometimes material just needs a little more time to effectively screen. But then you do reach a point where maybe the material is too wet, and running the drum down at 3 degrees turns the machine into a concrete mixer, which you don't want. So if those really extreme high moisture applications, you want to take that back up to maybe 5 or 6 to get it through the drum and not create a bunch of mud balls. So that's a good question. What other features or adjustments would you make to help overcome this challenge?
Well, the next one would be your drum speed.
Yeah.
What we're going to want to do is in this application is lift this material and throw it against the screen to help break that up to process it. So the normal clock analogy we use to simplify this is, you want to speed it up so your material comes to an 11 o'clock and throws it between the 4 and 6. Yeah. And this is where we're going to see our best performance.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes customers run their drums a little bit slower, and in a wetter application, it doesn't create that aggressive screening action you need to really throw the material. So that's definitely a good spot. I do want to stop here and ask a question. What type of, or what method do you use to really determine a moisture level of a material?
Well, there are several ways, and we kind of prefer, I use a scientific method, so you just go up to the pile and just grab a handful of it. You're going to squeeze that material, and if you release your hand and the material actually releases itself and falls back apart, you're in that 40, probably less % moisture range, and you're not going to have a problem screening.
Right.
Now, if you squeeze it and it maintains that ball shape, that's why we're having these conversations.
Right. Yeah, and definitely when you grab a handful and you squeeze it and you see water maybe dripping or running out of your hand, that's a point where you're in that extreme moisture range of 60, 65 or more % range, and you're likely not going to get very effective separation. So those are some good ways to measure that. What kind of features do we have when it comes to screen options to overcome screening in high moisture applications?
So obviously we offer a variety of sizes. This particular application, we're going to be looking at probably a 5/8 inch diameter screen.
Yeah.
The wire gauge is going to be crucial here, so we're going to run a 12, maybe 14.
Yeah.
And then the other option that's critical here, and we've seen a lot of success, is instead of a standard wire, we run a stainless.
Right.
So between that small diameter and that stainless wire, that really lets the material flow through and it doesn't hang up like it would on a normal screen.
Yeah, we see that stainless has just got a slicker material that the standard steel kind of can rust and develop a bit more of an adhesion to wetter materials. So that's definitely a good point. And I think you mentioned, we can use a thinner gauge wire because we're clamping and tensioning our woven wire screens onto our drum, which gives them better rigidity for handling some of that more aggressive screening action, but allows us to really use a thinner wire, opening our screen area and allowing us to screen in those wetter situations.
Correct.
What about when it comes to brushes? What kind of things do we need to keep in mind when it comes to brushes?
So this is where your brushes are going to play that critical role. Just like anything else, it is a wear item, so we're going to want to keep an eye on them, make sure they're in good shape. And then the most crucial part is the adjustment. This is where we typically see this misdone in the field. So what we're going to do is we want to adjust that bristle so it is penetrating the screen from about 1/8 to 1/4 inch, and no deeper. Effectively, if you go deeper, all you're going to do is damage that brush and you're going to have negative effects.
Right. Yeah, I see a lot of customers that are frustrated with wet applications, and so they intuitively think, well, more brush is better, which in the short term may be true, but it can really be a shortcut to just wearing out your brushes. So just getting a 1/4 inch of penetration is really more than enough to effectively screen. What about for some of these really wet areas of the country, or applications where you're spending more time in a wetter situation? What other brush options do we have to overcome that?
So what we do have is we have the double brush option. So now you'll be running 2 brushes per section. This is going to give you that ability to really clean your screens.
Yeah.
And the benefit to the double brush also is the individual adjustments to each brush. So as we're screening this wet material, making use of this double brush setup, a few days from now, we're not going to probably need both. So what we'll do is back the one off and save that brush. There's no use wearing it out early.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a beautiful design. I do have a question here. What do we typically see for a typical lifespan of a brush?
So to answer that question, I'm going to go back to the adjustments. This is where we need to do, and we need to make sure it's adjusted properly. Now, if it is adjusted properly, and even say a lot of these times we're in your screening and don't need that brush and we're not running it, effectively probably a 400-hour life usage.
Yeah, we do see a pretty wide range, and a lot of it's dictated by the adjustment. A more aggressive brush is going to wear out quicker. A brush that's lightly brushing is going to last substantially longer. But I agree. I think 400 hours is a good point. And so the final point here I want to make with screening high moisture is a feature that we have that goes over the in-feed hopper. What can you talk to us about that?
So that would be called the vibratory live head. So what this does is it's a grid system that's going to mount over the hopper. So as we're feeding this material in, not only is it going to help keep larger contaminants from entering your drum, but the real thing this does is those clumps, because of the moisture, that vibrant shaking will actually break those down. So it's a pre-screener before we actually begin the screening process in the machine.
Yep, absolutely. Which is a great segue into another situation that a lot of our customers see themselves in, and that is screening heavy materials. If you're doing topsoil or just compost, a lot of times there's hidden contaminants in there. It could be a chunk of concrete or a small boulder, and you definitely don't want to put those directly into your machine, especially if you're running a lighter gauge screen like a 12 gauge that you could potentially blow that out. So what features do we have to help our customers overcome heavy materials?
So similar to the live head, we have the grizzly. The grizzly is more of a fixed feature with a series of bars. So basically we're putting a grid system over that hopper. And what that's going to do is keep everything 6 inches and larger out, so we don't cause that damage you're referring to. Another key part to that is that material builds up. It's a one-touch on your remote, and it will actually run through a cycle, lift, and dump itself.
So pretty easy to clear the grizzly as it builds up with material. And there's a kick plate on the side of the machine, right, to
discharge that material,
to help kind of push it away from the machine, so you're not scratching up your side of the machine. So what about when it comes to screens? What options do we have to help overcome these heavy materials?
So in this is somewhere we're going to consider putting in a heavier screen. Like we talked to smaller ones in the wet, here we're going to go the opposite. So we're probably going to run 4 gauge, maybe even heavier, depending on what we're truly feeding this thing.
Right. Yeah, I've seen some screens that we've sold that are a 1/4 inch thick wire, which is incredibly beefy and oftentimes hard to get to form around that drum, but for really heavy duty applications, we've got screens to help overcome that. Talk to me about what it means, what options we have for different drums that can help overcome heavy materials.
So what we have is an auger drum, which is literally just it's a tube, and it's going to have a series of laser cut holes. And these are going to be determined by the customer's application.
Yeah.
And it's got a series of auger flighting that actually runs the drum. So our typical lift drum, we're relying on gravity, right, to help us get this material through. Well, here we're still doing that, but most of this is going to be processed by the actual augers moving this material down the drum. Mm-hmm. So unlike the lift and throw technique we were talking, now we're just doing the tumble and roll through the bottom, which this was a good application in like an aggregate market or somewhere like that.
Yeah. Nope, great point. Moving on from heavy materials, when it comes to a trommel screen, there's a lot of different settings and adjustments you can make to really get the most out of your machine. And there's a lot of nuance in, I guess, kind of setting one up and seeing the fine details between trying to get more production and make your machine run smoother. Talk to us about these machine settings and how to walk through that.
So like we've been through several already, right?
Yep.
So we have to start somewhere.
Yep.
So what I recommend in the field is let's get the machine there. We'll get our slope set first at the 5 degree. I'm going to go in and set my drum speed around 18 to 20 RPM.
Right.
And I'm just going to run my initial hopper conveyor at a real conservative lower speed.
Right.
From here, we're going to go ahead and cycle the machine. We're going to start doing our screening. Mm-hmm. Basically, we're going to observe this, watch the material start flowing through that drum, and see what it approaches or what it looks like as it approaches our overs conveyor.
Yeah.
So with the slow setting, odds are we're going to process most of our fines realistically between probably half and 3/4 of the way through the drum, which is great. So now we've established this.
Yep.
So now we need to increase that speed a little bit on our hopper to effectively use the rest of that screening area to get the most productivity we can out of this machine. Effectively, I mean, the thing we wanted to consider is when you're making these adjustments is go in small increments and give the machine some time to run, because it's not going to change instantly. It's not like turning the light on and off.
Right.
So what we're going to do is probably bump this up to the point you may get some fines into your overs, and in some applications this is going to be perfect.
Right.
And others are going to want to just back that off so we do get that last little bit to drop through the screen so we're not losing that.
Absolutely. It does take a trained eye to see that fine line between where you're effectively screening all your fines, and then you start to see that drift over into your overs belt, and you can kind of play with that with your in-feed speed, or you could adjust the slope depending on the moisture content. But I liked your point on making an adjustment and letting it kind of play out. I see a lot of customers, newer operators, that start to chase their tail by making too many adjustments too quickly, and they can't really follow what adjustment is making the difference.
Exactly.
So, good point. What about when it comes to screen setups? You know, with the independent screen panels, we've had some customers play around with different configurations. What can you talk to us about that?
So what we've seen is when doing this application, so say we're screening a topsoil, we need a 1/2 inch minus product.
Yeah.
Normally you would fill the drum with 1/2 inch screens, but to actually squeeze a little bit more out of this trommel, what we found is if we put, say, a 5/8 in the first 2 sections and then the 1/2 inch in the back 2, what this does is it gives us just a little bump in production and the balance of a good quality product. And that's due to the amount of material when it initially enters the drum. The material is also helping size just because the massive amount.
Right.
By the time we get towards the end, that's when we're really going to want to make sure we keep those overs out of our finished product.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the beauties of having the independently clamped on screen panels. I do want to stop here and ask a question. What kind of features do we have to prevent overfeeding?
So what our trommels are equipped with is a pressure sensor, and what we're doing is, since we're able to do this due to the drum is a hydraulic driven drum, so we monitor this hydraulic pressure. So what we'll do is go in our remote and set this and just say 2800 or 2800 psi is a max. So what this is going to do is as that material starts getting in the drum and it's heavier and heavier, obviously it takes more hydraulic pressure, right, to keep that thing turning. Well, once it hits 2,800, it's going to stop the end feed because at this point it's too much.
Right.
So now we're going to just continue with the drum. There's no more material coming in. Clean that up, and then the end feed will come back in once we get down to an accurate PSI rating.
And like you mentioned, it's completely adjustable. You can, on the remote, depending on the material type and how aggressively you might want to run it, you can adjust that set point. And it's a great way to prevent having to grab a shovel. If you make a mistake and you accidentally overfill the drum and it could potentially stall, that could present a real challenge and create a plugging situation. So it's nice to know we've got a feature like that to help reduce that. Moving on, we do have another unique feature that allows our customers to separate bagged materials. What can you tell us about this?
So this is what we call our knife kit option. These are just a series of knife sections you can install on any of our lift drums. And like I said, as section means you can put it in 1, 2, 3 sections of the drum, depending on the amount of material we're trying to rip. Usually 1 to 2 will effectively break this bags open and get the product out.
Sure. So what types of applications have we seen a lot of success with and being really effective?
So yard waste bags is a real common thing at some landfills so they can get that paper separated. Seen a lot of different mulch yards use it to break open, say, damaged bags of mulch, or they've gotten wet, whatever reason, we need to get that out of the bag. So what this does effectively tears them open, drops your product, and your bags are actually what comes out your overs. So it eliminates all the manual part of cutting and dumping these bags.
Put like a big 2-inch screen or 2.5-inch screen to help allow that mulch to go through, but obviously the bags will just come out the overs.
And then probably the biggest application I've seen this used in is breaking open sandbags.
Yeah.
We've had crazy weather all over for the last couple years, and flooding is one of them. So we get these excess mountains of sandbags. What do we do with these? This gives you the ability to quickly break them down, and now you've got the sand back.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see that in the video here. Really separates beautifully what was once a big pile of really useless flood water contaminated sandbags, and allows the person or the customer to reuse the sand and then just dispose a much smaller percentage of the used bags. I will say, you mentioned yard waste. I do want to bring up the fact that in yard waste, you do present the possibility of maybe some heavier contaminants. You want to talk about some of the challenges you may have with that?
Well, and that goes back, so fortunately, if we're going to do yard waste, we're going to want a larger screen anyway, so that gives us the ability to run a larger screen. The unfortunate part is we can't control what you put in that yard waste bag.
Right.
And I'm sure people listening have seen everything.
Right.
So they know what we're talking about.
Yeah, and sometimes we've seen customers that, or residents that put some really heavy chunk wood or chunks of concrete. And I just want to make the point that this knife kit is very aggressive in cutting, but doesn't handle some of those heavy contaminants very well. So you got to be kind of cautious with what you put in with the knife kit. So moving on to the next subject, I do want to talk about the versatility we can create with using our quick change screen system. Can you talk to us more about that?
So like you said, it makes the machine more versatile, and that is being able to change from one product screening to another, and I'm talking basically whole size. So maybe we're going from aggregate to mulch, whatever it is. With the screen size, we can effectively go in, change our screens, and get on and do this other process. Most other applications, you're looking at changing a drum to do this, and that is very costly over just a quick change screen.
As you can see here in the video, it's really just 5 large bolts that you have to loosen to release that clamp, and having a couple guys to remove that and put a new one back on makes it a pretty decent process. Certainly a little bit slower than removing a drum, but the big savings is in the capital cost. You're not investing in an entire second drum. You can have multiple sets of screens for the same cost of a drum, which allows you to just be more versatile and be able to change. I do want to stop here and ask a question about, a lot of customers want to know, how much time does it take to change a set of screens?
Well, that is a very good question. So, we don't really publish this just due to it's going to depend on the nature of the people, right? And the training. So our books are very well wrote. So if you go through and follow this procedure, and you've got a couple guys and the proper tools, what I say is you can change a screed panel effectively in 30 to 45 minutes.
I think that's fair. Some customers maybe do it on a more frequent basis.
Exactly.
Can do that quicker. And like you're seeing in the 6450 here, the TR 6450, that drum has 8 panels on it. So you're effectively looking at maybe a 3.5 to 5 hour job, depending on how efficient you are, to change out a drum, and that'll change depending on the model.
Correct.
Awesome, very good. We'll move on. So like we started off talking about high moisture, the inverse of that is really dry material. And dry material, as you can imagine, with a drum rotating like that, can generate quite a bit of dust. What kind of features have we added to help control or control that dust better?
So what we've done, and to kind of reiterate what you said, so as this thing's making the dust, most of our dust is coming from the top of the machine, and that's just due to the drum turning, just like Ted mentioned. So what we're going to do here is what we've got is a drum cover, and this effectively covers that drum and our brush system.
Yep.
And now we've isolated our dust to basically our entrance and the exit points of the drum. Right. I mean, there's no way to alleviate it, but we can somewhat control that.
Yeah.
So now if you're in that, urban area or whatever, you keep your neighbors happy.
Yeah. I know in certain parts of the country, permitting for dust control is a huge challenge for our customers, and so something like this can really help reduce, I should say, or control the dust. So definitely something to take a look at. Moving on to our final topic, which is material handling, which I think is probably another one of those major challenges our customers face in getting their raw materials through their facility and just efficiently handling the material as they process it. What kind of features do we add to our trommels to help overcome that?
So what we have is our radial option. Mm-hmm. So what this is going to do is give you the availability on your fines to do a full range swing of 180 degrees. And also it's going to give you the range from a couple 3 feet to 14 to 15 feet of a stack height.
Right.
And the nice thing about this is that your operator is totally committed to keeping this machine fed, monitoring that, doesn't have to worry about that fines pile building.
Right.
As it is building by just a couple pushes of the remote, the operator can swing that conveyor and effectively screen for a very large portion of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another big benefit, getting back to that dust challenge, we've all seen on our standard fines conveyor, when it's up in the air, there's a long drop to the ground, and on a really windy day, that means your pile turns into a giant teardrop, and it can send dust clear on over into your neighbors, which none of our customers want. And so being able to drop that conveyor down with the remote control and slowly build that pile is a huge benefit for just keeping that material in the pile and in a nice clean stack. So definitely a good point. I do want to pause here to see if there's any more questions coming in from Facebook here. Don't appear to be, so we're going to wrap things up by thanking you all for tuning in. This has been Let's Talk Shop, and thanks for joining us.